Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America, and I'm delighted to have as our guest today Cliff Albright, who is the co-founder of the Georgia-based Black Voters Matter Fund. Cliff is its executive director, and I'm sure you know the other co-founder, Latasha Brown, from her great work on the bus and on our TV screens, as the organization scoured the South for voters in the general election that gave us President Biden and Vice President Harris, and also in the Georgia Senate runoff that gave us Senators Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff. And so welcome so much, Cliff, to the program.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you.
So all of that tremendous work, and we, are just in awe of what you managed to do. You actually managed to save our democracy for us by, the work that you did extensively in getting voters to the polls. But now you have a whole new agenda, a whole new slate of work that needs to be done, because all across the country, I think they're saying in at least 42 or 43 states, there are now serious voter suppression laws in place, being passed, being considered. And now you all are working to upturn those to make sure that people can still vote.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, 43 states, over 250 bills, and the state that's leading the way, unfortunately, is the state where I'm sitting right now, which is the state of Georgia. It was the epicenter of voter suppression back in 2018 when Stacey Abrams was running for governor. This year, again, it's been the epicenter of voter suppression. And ever since January, since the new session has come in, they've launched an onslaught of voter suppression bills, the likes of which we've not seen, not just since Jim Crow of the 50s and 60s, but we've not seen an attack at this level, at this pace, at this breadth. We haven't seen this since Jim Crow of the post-Reconstruction era. That's how intense it's been here in this state, where they're trying to do everything from getting rid of no excuse vote by mail to attacking Sunday voting as part of early vote, and a range of other things that they're trying to do with this legislation. It's really unconscionable. Right,
souls to the polls too, and even people bringing food. It's going to that low level of true discrimination.
Yeah, and we were in the midst of that, in the midst of this election, we had a Trump supporter who actually pulled a gun on some of our workers and some of our partners in Southwest Georgia for that very same reason, because we were out there doing what we and many of our partners do, which is providing voter comfort, line warming, food, water, sometimes pizza, giving out masks, sometimes giving out sanitizers, because again, this was in the midst of a pandemic. And while our workers were doing this, we had a Trump supporter who was complaining and just acted a fool and went to the extent of actually pulling a gun on our workers. That's the kind of thing that we're seeing. And so, when these state officials, even the Secretary of State officials who tried to warn Trump and told him somebody's going to get hurt, right? And some people around the country thought that there was some kind of profiling courage, even as they were saying that, they themselves were suppressing the vote. They themselves were delivering a message to people like this Trump supporter that pulled a gun, that there's all sorts of fraud taking place. They were inciting just as much violence through their actions here in this state as what Trump was doing to the people that raided the Capitol. It's the same type of thing. It's all based on the big lie that you've got this rampant fraud taking place. And what we've been perhaps most disappointed in, just as King said that perhaps even bigger than the KKKers and the white supremacists, that his biggest disappointment was the white moderate. What we're most disappointed with in this state is the business community, which has been absolutely silent on this issue. At best silent, at worst, they've actually been complicit on this issue of voter suppression.
Yeah, so I noticed that Stacey Abrams and you all are also calling on private companies, the big mega companies, to do something, to come out and say something, and also asking the athletes and the entertainment stars who have arrangements with the big companies to force them to do that. Talk a little bit about that, because I think that would be a tremendous voice across the country if corporate America would step up and if the athletes would make them step up.
Yeah, we're thankful for the athletes. Of course, the NBA All-Star Game was here this past weekend, and many of the athletes, you know, especially those associated with LeBron James and his organization, More Than a Vote, they were very direct. They were very straightforward. LeBron did a whole commercial talking about the voter suppression, right? We
Right.
saw interviews with some of the athletes who, you know, in addition to talking about the game and jump shots and points, were also talking about voter suppression. So we're thankful for them for the role that they've played. We're less thankful to the business community that has
Right.
not been as responsive, that, you know, either for a long time did not issue any statements, and then when they finally did issue the statements, like the Atlanta Metro Chamber of Commerce issued a statement where basically they were playing both sidism. They were basically saying, yeah, we support voting rights, but there doesn't need to be a but after that. That's like saying we support ending segregation, but like there's no but that comes after voter suppression. But
That's
they were
true.
buying into the big lie by saying that they want our elections to be secure. Well, as soon as you say that in your statement, then you have framed it in such a way where you've bought into the lie that the elections weren't already secure, in spite of the fact that it was a Republican Secretary of State who verified that there was no fraud, that there were no irregularities, that the elections were the most secure that we've ever had. Still, to see the business community issue statements that are buying into that framework is incredibly disturbing. So that's why we say they've been complicit. But on top of that, not only that, they've actually given money to these
Sure.
legislators, not just
Right.
any old Republican legislators, to the very legislators that are sponsoring and pushing these voter suppression bills. They've supported them in the past with millions of dollars. AT&T has been the biggest supporter. They've given $100,000 alone to just the sponsors of these voter suppression bills. So they've actually been complicit in all of them. AT&T, Coca-Cola, Southern Company, Delta, Home Depot, we're asking them to step up, to not just issue statements, but to issue clear statements saying that they are against this voter suppression,
So
and
you're,
beyond that, to use
yeah.
the full force of their political and economic leverage to fight these bills.
Exactly. So you're naming names, and in this, it's interesting. You mentioned Jim Crow and hearkening
Mm-hmm.
back to the laws that we had then. Another thing that harkens back to its use during the Jim Crow period is the filibuster. Talk to me a little
Yes.
bit about that. Now, that may seem like a big jump from talking about the corporations, but how do we stop these laws and how do we get good laws passed? And our
Yeah.
Congress seems to be in a lockhole, especially the Senate, when we talk
Yeah.
about a filibuster that would come in the way of any good laws that we would want passed.
Right. Yeah, and I'm glad you raised that, because it's not a jump at all, because just as we have to have an in-state strategy that pressures these corporations, and I'll say it's not just the in-state strategy, because anybody from across the country can make a phone call, send an email, or do something to pressure these corporations. But just as we need that strategy, we also need a federal strategy, because at the end of the day, if these voting rights bills that you referred to, HR 1 and HR 4, which is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which is trying to restore the Voting Rights Act to its strength prior to the Supreme Court case that gutted it, if we had these two pieces of legislation that had been enacted in January, like when Biden was walking in the inauguration from the Capitol to the White House, he should have been on his phone at that point saying, hey, y'all, we got to get this pushed through. That's how urgent. We need the fierce urgency of now. And if those bills had been passed sooner, then we wouldn't be in the situation we're in right now in Georgia, because what they're trying to do in Georgia would already be illegal. But it wasn't done then, but it can still be done if we end the filibuster. And as you said, that filibuster is a relic of Jim Crow. It is literally the same filibuster that people like Strom Thurmond used
Right.
in the 50s and 60s to block voting rights and civil rights. And that same filibuster is now being used to block voting rights, the voting rights fight of this generation. We've got to end that filibuster. Black voters risked their lives during this pandemic to come out and vote, to give Democrats the power to end, to not just to push voting rights, but to move a range of issues
Right.
that we care about. But to do that, we've got to end the filibuster, and we need everybody, including the White House, including President Biden, who did issue an executive order, but he needs to go further than that. He needs to send a clear message to the Democratic caucus. The full weight of the White House is behind ending the filibuster.
So you mentioned Jim Crow and the civil rights days, and I know that you and Latasha were just given an award. The 56th anniversary of the crossing of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. You were in Selma, and we have a clip that we wanted to show right now, and we'll pick up the conversation on the other side of that.
it seems like we're going through the same thing. It seems like we're in this vicious cycle, right? But the truth of the matter, y'all, I got good news for you. We are winning. And let me tell you what I mean by we are winning. Our liberation is not contingent upon white acceptance. Our liberation is not dependent on whether we win an election set up by a system that was set up and designed to give us a disadvantage.
So congratulations on being honored, justly so, for all of your work. You're a New York boy, I do want to say, that we've learned, but you've been in the South for a while now. How did you get there, and how did you get into this work?
The short answer is love, right? And love in two senses. One, in the sense of my love for the movement. I was a student of the civil rights movement. I had always studied like the tactics and strategies, but I had never lived in the South. And so when opportunity came to move down South, I took it. I moved to Selma, Alabama, where I lived for 9 years, where I lived, worked with, even hosted a radio show with one of the heroes of the civil rights movement, the noted attorney, J.L. Chestnut, who was actually Dr. King's attorney during the Selma movement. We hosted a radio show together for 3 years. So that's one part of the love. The other part of the love story is that my fiance, who's from Alabama, was living in Selma when we met. And so when we got engaged, we were like, well, hey, you could come up to DC where I was living at the time, or I could move down to Selma. And I decided because of that love of the movement that I would move down to Selma. And it's literally changed my life in more ways than one. It's changed my entire perspective on organizing, and in particular on electoral organizing, because I was not a big fan of elections. You know, I was, in some ways, I was anti-elections. I was like some of the people that we now try to organize now. And that's why when I hear from people, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. I don't believe in the system. I don't think it works. I know how they feel. And that's how we respond. And by affirming what they're feeling, that's how we're able to move people towards getting involved, because, you know, we understand and listen to where they're coming from. So that's how I got involved. And that's how I moved down to the South.
Well, interesting, because, you know, I'm from Lowndes County, Alabama. I told you, we promised each other that soon we would have a long conversation about Lowndes County. So I'm a Southern girl too, and all of my relatives are still in Birmingham, Montgomery, and Lowndes County. We still have our farm there, which was the third stopover during the original march from Selma to Montgomery. So lots of history that we can share. But I think I want our audience to go through now the things that are before us. You mentioned President Biden's executive order. Let's talk about what that would do. I mean, his authority, and with these executive orders, only applies to his agencies in the government. And I think what he's asking for is all agencies to submit proposals for their respective agencies to promote voter registration and participation, and they have to do that within 200 days. How strong is this, and what do you think the impact of it will be?
Yeah, you know, unfortunately, it's not very strong, and that's not necessarily because of any particular failure on Biden's part in terms of this executive order, but it's because it's really not a whole lot in terms of executive action, right? And so it's limited to voter registration. And the truth is, like, of all the challenges that we have, like, being able to register isn't necessarily the biggest one. You know, we've got tons of folk registered, but the bigger issue becomes like the access to actually being able to cast the vote. That's where you get into the photo ID. That's where you get into the closing of the polling places, the elimination of drop boxes, the cutting back of the early voting hours, all the things that they're trying to do in Georgia. And so it's very limited in that sense. With that said, there are some things in terms of executive action that he can do. One of the things is that the federal government can immediately start joining in on some of the litigation that's taking place against some of these states, right? Again, putting the full force of the White House and the Justice Department behind, you know, organizations like Legal Defense Fund and Advancement Project, and providing that kind of support. Truth be told, I believe that's part of the reason why, amongst all the appointments that are being held up in Biden's cabinet, they've been going after the Justice Department the hardest, right? They've been trying to limit.
Right, and the women of color everywhere, you know,
exactly.
Almost are being confirmed. We do have some wins, you know,
exactly.
But in the Justice Department, you know, with both Vanita Gupta and Christine Clark, you know, major issues there. So, so let's talk about something that would, again, have more impact, and that's For the People Act, which is actually passed by the by the House and waiting for some action. So
Right.
what do you think about that? Is that going to do something that's essential?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Affordable People Act will be critical. It does a range of things to open up voter access and to protect the vote. So some of those issues that Biden's executive order does not touch and perhaps cannot touch, the Affordable People Act deals with, again, dealing with the early voting and some other aspects of voter access. So that's a big step. And that's where the president can be more supportive. It's not enough just to say, I support voting rights or I support HR 1. The question is, how much of your political leverage are you willing to use to get this pushed through? How far are you willing to go to send a message to people like Joe Manchin in West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema in Arizona? How far are you willing to go to twist some arms? The same way LBJ, and he had his limitations, right? To be clear, LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, had his limitations, and he had to be pushed into glory by the civil rights movement. But once pushed, what did he have to do? He had to use all of his legislative skill, all of his years in being in Congress, to twist some arms, to count some votes, to offer some carrots, and yes, to offer some sticks to get some of those Congress people to do right and to vote for the civil rights and voting rights legislation. This is Biden's moment to do that. This is his moment to twist some arms and offer some carrots and some sticks and to get the Democratic caucus in line in order to end the filibuster. Because if they do not end the filibuster, not only won't they be able to move this voting rights legislation like HR 1 that we were just talking about, and HR 4, which perhaps is even more important because it restores the
John Lewis voting bill. Talk to us
exactly
about that now, and just add that to the package of of getting that through. Good luck with Senators Manchin and Sinema. I must say to the president, I'm not sure that I would want to be the one having to twist their arms, but go ahead.
But at the end of the day, so first in terms of HR 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, it's to restore those sections, the sections of the Voting Rights Act, which basically dealt with pre-clearance, which meant before a state like Georgia could try to do what they're doing now, they would have to get any electoral policy changes approved or cleared by the federal government, by the Department of Justice, right? So they would not have a blank check to just try to push through the kind of legislation that they're doing right now. That's a critical piece of legislation it adds more bite to even the stuff that's being proposed in HR 1. And so again, it's not enough to just say that I support that. You've got to be willing to use every tool at your disposal to get the Democrats to end the filibuster, to move that forward. At the end of the day, people like Joe Manchin, I mean, think about it, right? Because it's not even just voting rights. The same issue is being blocked.
Held up the $15 an hour pay scale. So right,
and he's from West Virginia, right? Which is not an economic powerhouse.
I know.
Right? I love folks in West Virginia, but we got to be honest, right? I'm pretty sure there's some folks in West Virginia that need the minimum wage to be increased, right? And so there's a pressure point. It's not enough to just say, that people like Manchin and people like Sinema are just responding to their constituents. Their constituents want a living wage. They want health care. Many of them want voting rights. They definitely wanted this COVID relief, right? And so it's not enough to just say, he's representing his state, because in truth, he's really not, and he won't be able to as long as that filibuster is in place.
Yeah, so listen, the last I heard from Senator Manchin about bending at all on the filibuster was, what's holding all of these votes up now is the threat of a filibuster. And what he's saying is, well, maybe it shouldn't be a threat. Maybe we should just make the minority, because who gets to use the filibuster is the minority opinion. And so he is saying now, just let them talk. And so this, could go on for days and days and days until they exhaust themselves. So, that's as far as we've gotten with Senator Manchin, and President Biden is still saying, as a former senator, he wants to find another way rather than doing away with, with the filibuster.
At the end of the day, Joe Biden, right? And I don't want to sound like the crazy man that just left the White House, right? The white supremacist. But Joe Biden was in D.C. for 47 years. Most of his adult life, he has spent serving in D.C., either in the Senate or in the White House, right? If after all his years in the Senate, he has not figured out enough ways, if he has not seen enough tools, if he's not cut enough deals so that he can't hold in check two people like Sinema and Manchin, then again, it's not a matter of whether or not the tools are there. It's a matter of the political will. And we need the president. And again, this is not to excuse Republicans, right? We know what they're doing. We know that they're suppressing the vote,
I was just going to bring that up. But let's talk about, the opposition, because they are proving themselves to be, I don't want to use the word clever, but definitely obstructive and able to do it based on the rules that exist in the United States Senate right now.
That's right. And what they've demonstrated, so they have demonstrated that they are ruthless in using power for evil, right? Let's just call it what it is. It's white supremacy, it's voter suppression. There's no use of power that Mitch McConnell and the Republicans will not use it, even to the extent of going to illegal actions, right? So we're not asking Biden or the Democrats to be evil or to be illegal. But what we are demanding is that they use the power that they have. We've got to stop thinking that power is somehow, is somehow something that's not honorable. Dr. King himself said, what we need is love and power, because power without love is reckless and abusive. But love without power is sentimental and anemic. And that's what the Democrats and the president are showing right now, right? They can use power. In fact, King went on to say, power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. So if they're really committed to using or to implementing the demands of justice in the spirit of love, they've got to use the power that they have. They've got to use the power that they have in advancing love and justice, the same way that Republicans have used it to advance evil, white supremacy, and voter suppression, right? Okay, you can use power for the good, or you can use it for the evil, and right now we need them to use it for the good.
Power for the good. Okay, so we have all of this legislation that we hope we'll get through somehow during the next 2 years, but 2022 is right around the corner. It's tomorrow. What are you predicting? What's your work from now until the elections in 2022? And do you think you can hold on to Georgia? And what happens in that gubernatorial race? What's going to go?
I love it, Carol. So part of what's going to happen in 22 is going to depend on two things. It's going to depend on to what extent, again, that the president and the Congress is able to move the agenda that we promised people when we were talking to them in this past election cycle. So in other words, if we get to 2022 and we've not passed voting rights, if the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is not passed, if there's no more COVID relief, right? Great job on the current bill. We'd love to see some more relief later on in the year, right? Some monthly relief. So if there's not action on some of these things, not to mention some other things like the minimum wage that we were talking about, like student debt forgiveness, which, by the way,
these are all Democratic promises, right? So those are the promises. Right?
These are the promises that were made to voters, in particular Black voters. And so if there's not action on that, it makes our job harder in 2022. The other thing, though, that 2022 is going to depend on is the extent to which we recognize, and we say this at Black Voters Matter all the time, there's no such thing as an off year. Like 2021, as much as I would love right now to be kicking back and relaxing, right?
Right.
2021 is going to be just as busy for us as 2020 was. It sounds crazy, but guess what? All those issues that people were marching in the streets for months in the summer around police violence, guess where a lot of those issues get decided? Yes, there's the federal George Floyd Act, but guess what? There's also issues around who's your city council person, because they're the ones that vote on the police budget. Who's your mayor? Who's the mayor appointing to be police chief? Who's the DA that makes decisions around whether or not police get charged and indicted on some of these? All of these get decided at the local level, and guess when a lot of these local level issues and elections take place? In the odd number years, in years like right now in 2021. And so if we invest in that work this year, then when we get to 2022, so they say you have to get ready, when you stay ready. If we stay ready and we invest in our communities in 2021 and we build our organizations and we support voters and continue the process and hold people accountable in 2021, then when 2022, we'll be ready and we'll be able to shock the world again.
We are unfortunately running out of time. I have to have you come back because you're fabulous.
Yes.
But the question, just tell me a quick answer to Stacey Abrams running for governor of Georgia. Is that going to happen?
She hasn't announced, and so I would never presume to speak for a Black woman. But I would. That's right. I've been married for 23 years now. So, but I'd be surprised if she didn't, and if she does, guess what? we're gonna do everything that we did in 2020 plus some, right? And,
Plus
if
some.
she runs, she will be the next governor of the state of Georgia.
Well, Cliff, thank you so much for being with us today. Black Voters Matter. Please reach out on the website. We have it up on the screen, and do whatever you can to help them make the changes that we need in all of the elections, the ones happening tomorrow, 2022 and beyond, to actually save our democracy. Thanks so much for being with us. And thanks to you all out there as well. I'm Carol Jenkins. The show is Black America, and we'll see you the next time.